The Waisman Center's 40th anniversary is being celebrated next month, and it's a bigger deal than you think. You'll find out why this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. There are a lot of amazing places on the UW-Madison campus, places filled with cutting-edge research, learning, discoveries, treatments, and more. The Waisman Center is truly one of the most amazing of those places, and for a great many of you, the least well-known. With a 40th anniversary celebration coming up in October, we take this opportunity to raise public awareness of the remarkable work taking place every day in the Waisman Center. And to help us do that, I welcome to For the Record Waisman Center Director Marcia Malik, Developmental Pediatrician and Medical Director of the Waisman Center Clinics, Dr. Maria Stanley, and Senior Scientist Anita Bhattacharya. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Marcia, if you could just start by describing the Waisman Center. I mean, you and I have talked about this for a number of years, the idea that the Waisman Center is one of the lesser known places on campus, which is kind of amazing.
It is amazing.
But just, just in terms of an introductory piece, describe the Waisman Center.
So the Waisman Center, as you said, is celebrating its 40th anniversary, and it actually started before the building was completed. The building was completed in 1973, but there were activities at the university that were precursor activities to the Waisman Center starting 10 years before that. And the mission of the Waisman Center is to advance knowledge about developmental disabilities such as Down syndrome, autism, cerebral palsy, Fragile X syndrome, and also about neurodegenerative diseases, which include Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, and other lesser-known neurodegenerative diseases. So we work on disorders of the nervous system, and also we study how to optimize human development.
So who was Waisman?
So Dr. Harry Waisman was a member of the University of Wisconsin Medical School faculty, and he was a pediatrician, and he also had a PhD in biochemistry. And he worked on polio and also PKU, phenylketonuria, which is a disease for which there's now mandatory newborn screening in Wisconsin and all over the U.S. and beyond. And on the first day of the baby's life, the baby is screened for PKU and now other genetic diseases, and we have Harry Waisman to thank for that because he advocated for this new strategy for maintaining public health, and that is to identify diseases that can be treated on the first day of life.
I think it's worth mentioning how it became named for Dr. Waisman.
So Dr. Waisman was to be the first director of the center. Originally, the plan was to name the center the Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Memorial Research Center in honor of President Kennedy's older brother who was killed during World War II. And during the construction of the center, Dr. Waisman tragically died. He died young in his late 50s. And the Kennedy family approached the University of Wisconsin and asked the president of the university to consider naming our center in memory of Dr. Waisman. Yeah. And so it's wonderful to be named in honor of someone for who we consider to be a role model.
Yeah, I think it's a great story, and it sort of speaks to the tradition of the center. Dr. Bhattacharya, one of the challenges here is going to be to really describe the scope of the work going on at the Waisman Center in 30 minutes. I don't think we're going to be able to do it. But maybe you could help us just by talking about your work as an example of what's being done there.
So what I do is I'm a human stem cell researcher, and we have several at the Waisman Center, and all of us are part of the larger University of Wisconsin Stem Cell and Regenerative Medicine Center. But our focus is on studying the nervous system using stem cells. And so we have common goals of using human stem cells to study both the development of the nervous system, so how the brain develops, how it might develop differently in developmental disorders such as Down syndrome or autism, and how potentially you can get neurodegenerative diseases when those cells start to degenerate or die. And so in addition to this very basic research, we also are trying to use the information that we gather for therapeutics, potentially to better design drugs once we know what's going wrong, or potentially cell therapies.
So you have all of the facilities you need, the labs and stuff at the Waisman Center, equivalent to what you would find at Whitmere or anything other places?
That's correct, and I think because we have shared interests. We collaborate perhaps more than many other research environments. We talk a lot about techniques. We talk about potential problems we're having. We talk about our discoveries among ourselves before potentially sharing them with other people. It's a very collaborative environment.
It's also possible in our environment because we have clinics taking care of children who have some of these disorders that Anita is studying. It's possible for clinicians and researchers to interact with each other in a really unique way.
Which happens every day.
Every day.
Dr. Stanley, we should make clear here from the beginning that you haven't been here all this long.
No.
You're the newbie on the panel.
I am.
Just maybe you could start by just talking about you were in Indianapolis for how long?
11 years.
And so from that perspective, how did you view the Waisman Center, and what was it that attracted you here?
So it's an exciting place. I feel so lucky to be here, and I'm so impressed by the opportunity to have researchers in the same building with clinicians, with education outreach, with a preschool, there are just so many different activities happening in the same center. And I think to the opportunity to interact with basic science researchers in a way that I've never had available to me before. There certainly was a lot of research going on at my previous institution, but to have a center that's just dedicated to the care of people with developmental disabilities and neurodegenerative diseases. I'm
really glad you said that.
Tongue twister. Is an amazing opportunity as a clinician. It's really exciting.
Well, I want to delve more into a little bit of all of this. We're going to do it when we come back right after this. In a few weeks, the Waisman Center will be celebrating its 40th anniversary, which is really a remarkable accomplishment for this place on the UW campus that very few people know about. I say remarkable because of the work done, not that it's so difficult to sustain. And Marcia Malek is the director. She's with me this morning. And the idea of Harry Waisman's contributions, I think, are significant up there with, the vitamin D discovery and that kind of stuff for which the University of Wisconsin is known. So it's interesting to think about what Harry Waisman would think of what's going on there today compared to 40 years ago.
So I'm in touch with the Waisman family. In fact, 25 members of the Waisman family are coming to our celebratory dinner. And
That's
so
great.
I do think about what Harry Waisman would think if he magically could walk through the door today of the building that he designed. And I think about what the world was like for people with developmental disabilities back in 1973 when our doors opened for the first time. And those were years where it was before children with developmental disabilities had a right to education, so they could be excluded from school. It was before people with developmental disabilities lived in the community. It was the era of institutions. Many people grew up without ever knowing a child with Down syndrome, or at that time, autism was a rare disease. Most people had never heard of it. So life was very, very different then. But Harry Waisman's vision and his articulation of the mission of the Waisman Center has proven to be a beacon that has guided us since our establishment over these 40 years. The mission is very similar. Science has changed, clinical care has changed, public policy has changed, but our overall mission of advancing knowledge about human development, developmental disabilities, and now neurodegenerative diseases, that was articulated by Harry Waisman 40 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been the roof over which we have enacted his vision in these years.
Yeah. It's tough to keep going from the big picture to the small picture, but you mentioned autism, and that's just going to pop for a lot of people. I mean, obviously autism is such a big topic today. Maybe you could help us understand, Dr. Stanley, the way research into autism is taking place now at the Waisman Center.
So Actually, I think I can talk a little bit about the clinical research that's happening, and so we're trying to understand more about a variety of issues for people with autism spectrum disorders, trying to understand about language learning, trying to understand about brain development, and really to understand more in hopes of better serving those people, people who have autism spectrum disorders. In addition, we have really worked just this last year. One of the big accomplishments that was in progress as I joined the center, and one of the things that made me really excited about being a part of the Waisman Center is that there's been a huge expansion at the Waisman for care for people with autism spectrum disorders, for diagnosis, and it's really amazing. This has been in partnership with the hospitals, and we are working to provide care for more children to make access easier for people who would like to come to the Waisman for an evaluation.
Yep. I didn't want to start with you right away, Anita, because I wasn't sure if your research was specific to autism or if the similarities with Down syndrome and some of the other stuff that you're looking at, but is it? I mean, is there? Can you?
Yeah, we have
speak to
several
that?
researchers who are actually studying autism at the cellular and molecular level, and we do that by studying specific autism spectrum disorders that are known to have a genetic basis. So there are some that have a genetic marker that maybe that can help us define those kinds of autism. And so we're working on Fragile X, we're working on Rett syndrome, which is another autism spectrum disorder that affects girls. And what many of us are doing is using disease-specific stem cells. So these are stem cells that we can get from skin cells of patients with these different disorders. And then in the lab, we turn them into stem cells, and then we can study how they turn into brain cells as a way to figure out what's wrong. So it's really the opposite end of the spectrum, if you will, of studying autism. We're studying the cells themselves. And then in between the cells and the clinics, we have imaging facilities at the Waisman Center where individuals with autism are imaged to figure out how their brains may work differently than people without autism. And so I think that we have this amazing breadth that is applied to some extent to autism, but we do study many other developmental disorders as well.
Is this even a place where we could, as an example of the manufacturing work that goes on there, is autism a place where there are medications that are being created and tried?
Not yet. So the horizon is further away in autism in terms of pharmaceutical treatments. But having the Waisman biomanufacturing program facility within the Waisman Center makes it possible for us to jump right on it when a new pharmaceutical treatment is developed. Then we can prioritize that. And what we can do is not be vulnerable to the profit issues that large pharmaceutical companies attend to. And so since we are a public institution, our biomanufacturing facility can advance even treatments for rare disorders or not so rare disorders, but for where the financial issues don't line up for large pharmaceutical companies.
Can you give us an example of a condition where right now there might be an interest in manufacturing a drug for a specific patient or a condition?
Well, we're just on the brink, we hope, of beginning a new pharmaceutical program for retinal degeneration. Yeah, so disorders of either developmental disorders of the eye or degenerative disorders of the eye, where the retina is affected. And so the eye is grows out of the brain. It's part of the nervous system, and so it's one place that we're very, very excited about developing. There are stem cell applications for Parkinson's disease that are beginning to work their way into the biomanufacturing facility, and we're very excited about that as well. In addition, we have novel therapeutics for cancer that are being developed within Waisman biomanufacturing, and so it's quite a broad facility, and we're thrilled to have it as part of our community. When you think about the fact that we have a preschool for children and we have clinics serving children in the same kind of facility under the same roof, that we have our stem cell program in Waisman Biomanufacturing. That's why I have a really interesting job.
No, but you've all talked about this a little bit, but help us understand the importance or the significance of having that preschool with the stem cell research, with every day. How does that interact?
So when we think about a developmental disability, there are issues about education, there are issues about child development, there are issues about therapeutics. And so if you take Fragile X syndrome, a child with Fragile X syndrome needs early stimulation, needs speech therapy, needs occupational therapy and physical therapy. All of that can happen in the preschool. A child with Fragile X syndrome, to understand the best way to provide speech therapy, we need to understand language development. We need to understand social development. We need to understand how that child learns differently in order to optimize the intervention. So our preschool is an example of translational research in action, because laboratory studying language in Fragile X syndrome or social development in Fragile X syndrome can then interact with the clinicians in the preschool or the clinicians in the Waisman Center clinics in order to develop and provide the best possible intervention. And then backing up even further, in order to understand brain development, understanding how neurons develop on the cellular level in someone with Fragile X syndrome makes the entire chain more precise and moving more toward a true translational program. Yeah. And so having all of this together, having us talking to each other every day sharpens this dialogue, sharpens and speeds the discoveries.
That's great. We're going to talk about the 40th anniversary celebration when we come back right after this. We are back. We're talking about the 40th anniversary of the Waisman Center. And on your screen, you see the details for the celebratory dinner, October 17th, and the website where you can look for tickets. This is a ticketed event. It's a big deal. It's at Monona Terrace. And Marcia, maybe you could just talk briefly about what's going on at the dinner, who's going to be there.
So the dinner is a chance for us to celebrate with the community that we have achieved this milestone of 40 years. And I won't go through all of our milestones, but one of them I think tells the story well. We've taken care of 160,000 children at the Waisman Center since the doors opened. And that's something to celebrate, because we are a resource for the community. Our new chancellor, Rebecca Blank, will be one of the speakers, and our keynote speaker will be David Marinas. And so we're just thrilled to have those two individuals sharing their perspectives on the Waisman Center with us, as well as Harry Waisman's oldest son, Don Waisman, will say a few words on behalf of the family.
Yeah.
It'll be at Monona Terrace. It's a big celebration, and we would love to celebrate with everybody in the community.
That's great. Everybody's invited. Maria, we talked about autism. There's so many things we could talk about, but I want to just hit on Down syndrome briefly, because I mean, is it fair to say we're making progress in Down syndrome?
We're making progress. I think things have changed dramatically, again, since the time that Dr. Waisman started the center. The life expectancy for people with Down syndrome has improved unbelievably. And that is in large part due to real improvements in medical care for people with Down syndrome, thanks to our research colleagues who have done work looking at understanding more about medical issues for people with Down syndrome, some real efforts for people to try to understand what is optimum care for people with Down syndrome. The American Academy of Pediatrics just put out their second iteration of guidelines for the care of people with Down syndrome, and good medical care along with inclusion in the community really has made a difference for people's lives.
And I think it's fair to say that a lot of these treatment ideas and research really started at the UW, right, Anita?
Yeah, some of them did.
Some of your colleagues.
Yeah, and so we, in my lab, we studied Down syndrome stem cells to try and figure out what might be different from when they turn into brain cells. And my work, in addition to all of the other researchers, really builds on pioneering work done by Sushan Zhang, one of our senior researchers, who figured out how to take stem cells and turn them into all the different kinds of brain cells that there are. And so we completely benefit from that, both on the neurodevelopmental side and the neurodegenerative side.
Marcia, we have so little time left, but talk about the future for the Waisman Center. What do you see looking at? What does the Waisman Center need to continue the work it's been doing for 40 years?
Well, we need to build and strengthen our partnerships with the community. For instance, we work really closely with the Madison Metropolitan School District. We work very, very closely with the American Family Children's Hospital, the Department of Pediatrics. We depend upon the broader community for a partnership model. We need the community to be more accepting of people with disabilities and to continue this amazing transition that's happened over the last 40 years, from the time where having a child with a developmental disability was something that people didn't admit to now life in the community is so much richer. I look forward to extraordinary discoveries that will lead to therapeutics, that will lead to amelioration of the symptoms of developmental disorders and neurodegenerative diseases. So much is on the horizon, and we are poised to really move ahead. And I think that the vision of Harry Waisman will guide us. The science of tomorrow will make it possible to realize that vision.
And I just want to throw in quickly the art exhibited in that building from people with disabilities is just remarkable in itself. Grandparents volunteering and working with the kids. I mean, that's the kind of community involvement, right?
Absolutely.
Examples.
We have a grandparents network which provides support to grandparents who have grandchildren with disabilities, and they can in turn take messages out to their communities, their friends, and change the world on behalf, to make it a better place for their grandchildren to grow up. We have this, as you say, amazing art collection, 150 pieces from all over the world made by people with disabilities, including our own Phil Porter here in Madison. But it reminds us that the word disability is a misnomer, because their artistic ability, the artistic ability of these 150 artists who made these pieces is so extraordinary, and so it just outstrips anything that I could do. I like to think about the Waisman Center as having a common focus with multiple angles of vision, including art, as well as science, as well as education.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk about this. I mean, it's a very rich place. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
I'm going to tell people to go to the website to learn about the symposium that's taking place a couple of weeks before the celebration, and we will come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. Now, this is one of those shows. The information on the annual celebratory dinner for the Waisman Center is on the screen, and my thanks to everyone from the Waisman Center for being here this morning. Next week, a familiar face returns. Former WISC TV sports anchor Jessie Garcia will be here. She'll be discussing her new book about her 20 years covering the Packers. That's next Sunday at 10. Thanks for watching. See you next week.